Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are doing something a little dangerous. We are going to try and dismantle the way you see your own life.
Just a small task for today, then.
Just a small one.
Yeah.
I mean, we usually walk around with this very strong, intuitive sense that we are the captains of our own ships.
Yeah.
You know, you decided to click on this deep dive. You decided what to wear this morning. You decided what your political opinions are.
That is the common sense view, yes. It feels very real. It feels immediate.
But the book we are covering today, Émile Durkheim's The Rules of Sociological Method, basically says, not so fast.
Mm-hmm.
This is a book that tries to prove that there are these invisible currents pushing you, shaping you, and constraining you. Forces that are just as objective and real as gravity, but you can't see them.
It's like the code of the matrix, but for social reality.
Exactly. But instead of computers, it's made of what he calls social facts.
It's really the manifesto for the science of sociology. And you have to understand the context here to appreciate, the weight of what he's doing. Durkheim is writing in 1895. And at this point, sociology is barely a thing. It's looked down upon. The serious scientists, the physicists, the chemists, they look at social studies and say, that's just philosophy. That's just opinion.
It was seen as fuzzy, right? A mix of guesswork and maybe some moralizing.
Exactly. It was a fuzzy mix of history and philosophy. People like Auguste Comte or Herbert Spencer were writing these massive sweeping histories of humanity, but they weren't strictly scientific. They were, telling stories about progress.
And Durkheim wanted to stop telling stories.
He wants to slam his fist on the table and say, society is a machine. It has laws. And if we are disciplined, if we are rigorous, we can discover them.
So he's trying to turn the study of people into something as rigorous as chemistry, which, that sounds incredibly ambitious considering how unpredictable people seem to be.
That is the explicit goal. He wants to treat social behaviors as things, objects that can be measured, tested, and predicted. He's arguing that just because human behavior involves consciousness, that doesn't mean it's exempt from cause and effect.
Okay, so let's get into the machinery. If we're going to study society scientifically, we have to know what the basic units are, the atoms of the social world.
And he calls these social facts.
Right. Now, I've read the definition, and it feels a bit slippery at first glance. What exactly distinguishes the social fact from, say, me just deciding to eat a sandwich because I'm hungry?
That is the crucial distinction. So if you eat a sandwich because your stomach is growling, that is biological. That's your body talking.
Okay.
But if you eat a sandwich because it's lunchtime and your culture dictates 3 meals a day at specific hours, that's social. Durkheim says a social fact has 2 very specific criteria that separate it from biology or individual psychology. The first one is exteriority.
Meaning it exists outside of me.
It was here before you arrived, and it will be here long after you leave. Think about the roles you play in life. You're a citizen. Maybe you're a husband or a brother or an employee.
Sure.
When you fulfill your duties as a citizen, did you invent those duties? Did you personally draft the Constitution or the tax code? No. I might agree with them. I might want to pay my taxes or follow the traffic laws, but I certainly didn't write them. I stepped into a role that was already written for me.
That's it, exactly. The duties are defined in law and custom. They exist independently of your will. Durkheim uses the example of the monetary system. You use currency, you use credit cards, you understand debt.
Right.
Did you invent the concept of value exchange? No. You step into a world where these systems are already up and running. They function completely independently of your personal use of them.
It's like stepping onto a moving train. The train is running whether I'm on it or not. I can choose where to sit, maybe, but I can't choose the tracks.
That's a perfect analogy. And that brings us to the second criteria, which is, let's call it the or else. Durkheim calls this constraint or coercion. And this is where the illusion of freedom really starts to crack.
Okay, this is the part that makes people uncomfortable, I think. We like to think we do things because we want to. I wear a tie to work because I like ties, not because I'm forced to. And often we do like it. Durkheim acknowledges that. When you conform to society, you often don't feel the pressure because you are, going with the flow. It's like swimming with the current. You don't feel the water pushing you because you're moving at the same speed.
But if you turn around.
Try to swim upstream, try to violate a social fact. That is when the resistance hits you. That's when you feel the force.
Okay, so let's talk about that resistance. If I break a law, the resistance is obvious. I go to jail. That's direct coercion.
That's the easiest one to see, legal constraint. Law acts to annul the act or punish the actor. Simple. But Durkheim argues the indirect constraints are just as powerful, sometimes more so because they are so subtle.
Like what?
Take fashion, or simple social etiquette. There is no law that says you can't wear a Victorian ball gown to a modern tech startup office.
I mean, HR might have some questions, and people would definitely stare, but I wouldn't get arrested for it.
You wouldn't be arrested, but what happens?
People laugh. They distance themselves. I lose credibility. I probably don't get promoted. I get isolated.
Exactly. The social reaction ridicule, isolation, distance acts exactly like a penalty. It forces you back into line. Durkheim says we are constantly navigating these pressures. We avoid the clown suit, not just because we don't want to wear it, but because we subconsciously fear the social penalty. We are constantly seeking approval and avoiding disapproval.
So that feeling of social awkwardness is basically a mild form of punishment.
It's a mechanism of control, absolutely. Durkheim even applies this to economics, which I found fascinating. We usually think of business as this free-for-all of innovation where the boldest individual wins.
Yeah, the myth of the rugged entrepreneur.
But look at the constraints. Imagine you are an industrialist. You want to run your factory using hand tools from the 1700s because you think they have more soul. You want to pay your workers in grain instead of cash. Are you free to do that?
Technically, yes, I guess.
Yeah.
There's no law saying I can't be inefficient.
Technically, yes, but the market will destroy you. You will go bankrupt. The economic relations of your time act with a coercive force that is just as ruthless as a physical law.
So if you don't adapt to the social fact of modern capitalism, efficiency, capital accumulation, wage labor, you are eliminated.
You are. You are free to fail, but you aren't free to succeed on your own terms.
So this paints a picture of us being, well, boxed in. We have legal boxes, social boxes, economic boxes. Durkheim seems to suggest that our whole idea of freedom is a bit of hallucination.
He puts it quite bluntly. He says, we are victims of an illusion, which leads us to believe we have ourselves produced what has been imposed upon us externally.
Wow.
We take the menu society hands us, we pick one of the three options, and we say, look how free I am, but we didn't write the menu.
That is humbling. And a little terrifying. He uses the example of raising children to prove this, which really hit home for me. It makes you rethink the whole process of growing up.
It's the most primal example. Look at education, not just school, but parenting from day one. Durkheim strips away all the romance, he says. What is child rearing, objectively? It is a continuous effort to impose ways of seeing, thinking, and acting on a child that they would never have arrived at spontaneously.
Yeah, we force them to sleep at certain times. We force them to eat with utensils. We force them to say please and thank you. We force them to control their bladders.
We are installing the software. We are manufacturing a social being out of a biological animal. Durkheim says the child naturally has no impulse to sit still or to respect authority. We hammer it in.
And eventually, the constraint becomes a habit.
It becomes a habit, and we call it character or nature, but originally it was all external pressure.
So we are basically terraforming our kids' brains to fit the social landscape. And eventually the kid forgets the pressure and just thinks, this is who I am.
Yes, the external becomes internal, and once that software is installed, it runs in the background. But Durkheim also talks about something he calls social currents. These are forces that aren't crystallized like laws or manners. They're more like bursts of energy.
Like mob mentality.
Yeah.
We're getting swept up at a concert.
Precisely. Think about being at a massive protest or a riot or even a really intense sports game. You feel things, anger, euphoria, a sense of power that you would never feel if you were sitting alone in your room.
Oh, yeah. You get swept up. It's like the energy is coming from the outside, not from you. You scream things you wouldn't normally scream.
It is coming from the outside. That is a social fact. It's a current sweeping through the group. And Durkheim says the proof is that afterwards, when the crowd disperses and you go home, the emotion just vanishes. You might even look back and say, why did I do that? That wasn't me.
That classic phrase, I wasn't myself.
But you were. You were just a vessel for the collective emotion. The social fact was operating through you.
Okay, so we've established that these things exist. They are external, they are coercive, and they can possess us like a spirit. Now, how do we study them? Because Durkheim has a very famous rule here, and it sounds almost contradictory, he says. Consider social facts as things.
This is rule number one, the most fundamental rule. If you get this wrong, you get all of sociology wrong, according to him.
But people aren't things. We aren't rocks.
Yeah.
Is he being dehumanizing here? Is he saying we're just objects?
That's the common misunderstanding, and it's a fair one. He doesn't mean we are material objects. He means we must treat social facts as data. We must treat them as unknowns.
Okay.
We have to approach social life with the attitude of a physicist or a chemist entering an unexplored region.
As opposed to what? I mean, how were people studying society before this?
As opposed to pre-notions. This is a big problem in sociology that, say, physics doesn't really have. If you study a supernova, you don't have a personal emotional relationship with that star. You don't have a preconceived notion of whether the star is moral or immoral.
Right, you just look at the light. But I have a lot of opinions about marriage and crime
Yeah.
and democracy.
You know.
I live in them.
Exactly. You live inside them, so you think you know them. Durkheim says before sociology, people were doing ideological analysis. They would start with their idea of what the state should be or their idea of what a good family is, and then they would look for facts to support that idea.
So, confirmation bias, basically.
It's alchemy. He compares it to the alchemists who spent centuries trying to turn lead into gold. Why?
Oh.
Because they had a mystical idea that gold was perfection and lead was corruption, so nature must want to become gold.
They were projecting their desires onto matter.
They were. Chemists, on the other hand, look at the properties of matter as they are. Durkheim is saying, stop doing alchemy with society. Stop telling me what the state should be. Look at the data. What is it actually doing?
So we have to check our baggage at the door. We have to pretend we know nothing about the society we live in, which is a very hard thing to do.
It requires incredible discipline. He says we have to define phenomena by their external characteristics, not our internal feelings. We need an objective tag.
Let's apply this. How does this change how we define something like crime? Because if you ask me to define crime, I'd say something bad or something that hurts people.
And Durkheim would say, stop. Bad is subjective. What is bad to you might be good to someone else. Hurts people is vague. Does a dentist hurting you count as a crime? Does a surgeon cutting you open count? No. We need an external tag. A visible sign that separates crime from non-crime.
The reaction.
The reaction. What happens when a crime is committed? Society punishes it. So scientifically, Durkheim defines crime as any act that provokes punishment. It doesn't matter what the act is. In ancient Greece, it might be impiety. In modern America, it might be tax evasion. The content changes, but the mechanism, the punishment, is the objective thing we can study.
So crime is just the label we put on things we decide to punish. It's not an intrinsic evil. It's a social category.
Exactly. And once you view it that way, coldly, objectively, you start to see patterns you missed before. Which leads us directly to the most controversial part of the book. I think this is the part that really upset people when it was first published.
I can imagine.
We've defined crime objectively, but then Durkheim looks at the data and says, crime is normal.
Yeah, this is a head-scratcher.
Ah.
Because we spend billions of dollars trying to stop crime. We teach our kids not to be criminals. How on earth can he say it's normal?
So this is his distinction between the normal and the pathological. And to be clear, he doesn't mean normal like it's okay to do it or we should encourage it.
Okay, so he's not making a moral judgment.
No, he's trying to make a medical diagnosis. He asks, what does health mean for a society? How do we know if a society is sick?
And usually we'd say a healthy society has zero crime, just like a healthy body has zero cancer.
That's the intuitive view. But Durkheim applies his scientific method. He says normality is defined by generality. If a biologist looks at 1,000 ant colonies and every single one of them has a queen, then having a queen is normal. Even if the queen is weird or aggressive, if it's always there, it belongs to the nature of the species.
So he looks at human societies.
And he finds that there is not a single society in the known history of the human species that is free of crime. It is universal, from the smallest tribe to the biggest empire, from the monasteries to the megacities. Therefore, scientifically, crime is a normal part of social physiology.
But that's just statistics, right? I mean, just because it happens everywhere doesn't mean it's good for us. Tooth decay is pretty universal, but we don't say it's healthy. We try to fix it.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
But Durkheim goes further. He argues that crime is not just statistically normal, it is functionally necessary. A society without crime would actually be impossible, and if it were possible, it would be a nightmare.
Walk me through that logic. Why do we need criminals? That sounds completely counterintuitive.
Okay, think about why we punish crime. We punish it because it offends our collective sentiments, the shared values of the group.
Right. We all agree murder is wrong, so we punish the murderer. We all agree theft is wrong.
Now, imagine a society where absolutely no one commits a crime. Not even a minor one. No jaywalking, no rudeness, no theft. For that to happen, what would have to be true?
Everyone would have to be perfect.
The collective conscience, that internal voice of society in your head, would have to be incredibly powerful. It would have to be so strong in every single person that it overrides every single individual impulse to deviate.
It would be a society of robots or clones. Everyone would have to think exactly the same way about everything.
Exactly. The pressure to conform would have to be suffocating.
Mm-mm.
And here's the kicker. If the collective pressure is strong enough to stop all crime, it is also strong enough to crush all originality. You cannot have the freedom to be creative, to invent, to think differently, without also having the possibility of deviating from the rules.
I see. So the same door that lets in the criminal also lets in the genius.
They are two sides of the same coin, individual variance. If you clamp down hard enough to stop the thief, you also clamp down hard enough to stop the artist, the reformer, or the scientist who challenges the status quo. Durkheim uses the example of Socrates.
Socrates the philosopher.
Socrates the criminal. Remember, under Athenian law, he was a criminal. He was charged with corrupting the youth and introducing new gods. He offended the collective sentiments of his time deeply.
And he was executed for it.
He was punished. But that crime, his independence of thought, was necessary for the moral evolution of humanity.
Wow. So if Athens had been a perfect, crime-free society, Socrates would have just kept his mouth shut.
And we would be stuck with the old morality forever. Crime prepares the way for the future. It proves that the collective conscience is still flexible. A society without crime would be petrified. It would be stuck in a rigid state, unable to adapt to new conditions.
So paradoxically, the criminal plays a role in public health. They keep the moral structure open to change.
That's his argument.
That is such a flip. Instead of seeing the criminal as a parasite, you see them as a symptom of a flexible living system. They are the outliers that prove the system can still breathe.
Now, Durkheim does add a caveat. Excessive crime is pathological. If the murder rate triples overnight, that is a sickness.
Of course.
But the existence of crime itself, that is healthy. It indicates a society that allows for individual variation.
This brings up a question of comparison, though. You said crime changes. What was a crime in Athens isn't a crime now. So how can we have a general science if everything is changing all the time? What's normal for a hunter-gatherer society isn't normal for a modern Parisian.
This is where Durkheim introduces social types, or morphology. He says we can't just talk about humanity as one big lump. We have to classify societies into species, just like biology classifies animals.
Because you can't judge a fish by how well it climbs a tree.
That is exactly Durkheim's analogy. What is normal for a mollusk is not normal for a vertebrate. Durkheim says we have to classify societies based on their structure. How are their component parts put together? Is it a simple horde with no divisions? Is it a complex city-state? Is it a modern industrial nation?
So we have to judge normality relative to the species and the stage of evolution.
It's about comparing apples to apples. You can't say the U.S. economy is sick because it doesn't look like a feudal village.
Right. This was his way of finding a middle ground. Historians used to say every moment in history is unique. You can't compare them.
And philosophers would say all humans are the same. Durkheim says no. There are distinct social species, and they follow their own laws of development.
Okay, so we've got the parts. We've got the social facts, we've got the normal and the pathological. Now we get to the why. If I want to explain why suicide rates are going up or why laws are becoming more complex, where do I look? Durkheim seems to have a very strict rule about where we are not allowed to look.
He does. He absolutely rejects psychology, and this is where he picks a fight with almost everyone else in his time.
This is the part I really struggled with. Society is made of people. People have brains. Why can't we explain society by looking at individual brains? If everyone is depressed, society is depressed. It seems like simple addition.
It seems intuitive. If society is a collection of individuals, shouldn't social behavior just be the sum of individual behaviors? Durkheim says absolutely not. He uses the synthesis argument.
Is this the bronze analogy you mentioned earlier?
It is, and it's a beautiful explanation of emergence. Think about bronze. Bronze is a hard, tough metal, but what is it made of?
Copper and tin, and usually some lead.
Right. Copper is soft, you can bend it. Tin is soft, lead is soft. If you look at the copper atom, you will not find hardness. If you look at the tin atom, you won't find it. The hardness emerges from the synthesis, the mixing of the elements.
The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Exactly. So society is the bronze. When individuals come together, a kind of chemical synthesis takes place. A new reality is formed. This new reality society has its own laws, its own dynamics, which cannot be found in the individual mind. Durkheim calls it a reality sui generis unique unto itself.
He uses the cell analogy too, right? A living cell is made of non-living atoms.
Precisely. Life is not in the carbon atom. Life is not in the hydrogen atom. If you studied atoms forever, you would never predict life. Life is in the organization of the atoms. In the same way, social facts laws, customs, religions are not in the individual mind, they are in the association.
So Durkheim's golden rule is, the determining cause of a social fact must be sought among antecedent social facts, not among states of the individual consciousness.
That's it. That's the core of his method. If you want to explain a social change, you must look for a social cause.
So if I want to know why the suicide rate is rising, I shouldn't look at whether people are feeling sadder individually.
No. Because why are they feeling sadder? That's the real question. Durkheim would say, look at the social structure. Has the family structure collapsed? Has religious cohesion fallen apart? He argues that suicide rates are determined by these social currents of integration and regulation.
So the individual depression is the result of the social current, not the cause of the suicide rate.
Yes. This really removes the person from the equation, in a way. It treats us like particles in a fluid.
It does. He focuses heavily on the internal social environment. Things like the volume of the population and dynamic density. How much do people interact?
Dynamic density, that sounds like physics.
It is meant to. When you pack more people together in a city and they interact more, that's high density. That friction, that contact, creates a pressure. It forces labor to divide. It forces laws to become more complex. It forces culture to evolve.
It's a mechanical pressure. It happens whether the individuals want it to or not.
This also relates to his attack on utility, right?
Yeah.
We often tell ourselves these stories like, we created the government because it's useful to have order, or we built houses because we wanted shelter.
This is his critique of teleology explaining things by their end goal. Durkheim says that is completely backward. Usefulness maintains a habit, but it doesn't create it.
Can you give an example?
Sure, take the heart. The function of the heart is to pump blood. That's why it's useful. But did the desire to pump blood create the heart?
No, evolution did. A series of causes over millions of years.
Right. The heart was created by millions of years of evolutionary causes, genetic mutations, environmental pressures. The cause is different from the function. The need for something doesn't make it a pew. You can need a house all day, but unless you have the bricks and the labor, the cause, the house won't exist.
So just because we want order doesn't mean we build a government. We need a force like that dynamic density to push us into that structure.
Exactly. You cannot wish a social institution into existence. You need a cause. Durkheim says we must separate the study of cause, why did this happen, from the study of function. What is it good for? Durkheim. They are not the same thing.
It's very deterministic. It really feels like we are just watching a clockwork mechanism unfold.
It is deterministic. Durkheim wants to apply the principle of causality to human behavior. If sociology is going to be a science, it can't rely on free will or magic. It has to rely on cause and effect.
But that leads to a practical problem. If we can't look at individual psychology and we can't put society in a test tube, how do we prove any of this? We can't exactly run a controlled experiment where we crash the U.S. economy just to see if crime goes up.
That would be, well, unethical and impossible. So Durkheim says the sociologist has only one real tool, concomitant variations.
Which is a very fancy way of saying correlation.
Essentially, yes. Since we can't create the experiment, we have to look at the experiments that history has already run for us. We have to be detectives.
We look for patterns.
We compare cases. If we see that in France and in Germany and in England, different societies, every time religious cohesion drops, suicide rates go up, then that is a concomitant variation. They vary together.
It's like smoke and fire. If I see smoke every time I see fire, I could assume a link.
Exactly. We compare the cases where the phenomenon is present to where it is absent. If A changes and B changes, and it happens consistently across different species of society, we can infer a causal link. It's the only lab bench we have.
So you have to be a comparative historian as well as a sociologist.
You do. But Durkheim argues it is just as rigorous as the chemist's test tube, provided we have enough data and we strip away our pre-notions.
This really feels like Durkheim is fighting a war on two fronts. On one side, he's fighting the philosophers who just want to theorize. On the other, he's fighting the psychologists who want to make it all about the individual brain.
He is carving out a territory. He wants to prove that sociology is an independent science. It's not just group psychology, and it's not just philosophy of history. It deals with a unique level of reality, the social level, that has its own rigid laws.
And he's doing it by basically telling us that we as individuals are less important than we think. The individual is just the atom. The society is the organism.
And the organism has its own life. It has its own immune system, which is crime and punishment. It has its own anatomy, its morphology. It has its own mind, the collective conscience.
So let's zoom out. We've gone through the whole machine. We've seen that social facts are real things that push us around. We've seen that crime is a normal, even necessary part of our social immune system.
Right.
And we've seen that society is a kind of chemical synthesis that's bigger and different than the sum of its parts.
Then we've learned that to understand the world, we have to stop projecting our feelings onto it and look at the cold, hard data. We have to treat facts as things.
It really changes how you walk down the street. You don't just see people making choices anymore. You see currents. You see the social bronze that we are all melted into. You see the invisible architecture that dictates where we walk, how we talk, and even what we think is wrong.
It's a profound shift in perspective. It's humbling. It reminds us that we are part of something much, much bigger than ourselves. We are not just isolated individuals. We are nodes in a massive network.
And that leads me to the final thought I want to leave you with today. Durkheim suggests that our feeling of free will in social matters is largely an illusion because we are unaware of the pressure. We think we are choosing our fashion, our morality, our political opinions. But if Durkheim is right, we are mostly just refracting the collective conscience.
Which raises the really uncomfortable question. If we are just vessels for these currents, where do we end and society begin? When you feel that surge of outrage at the news, or a swell of patriotism, or even a deep sense of shame, is that you? Or is that the ghost in the machine pulling the levers?
Are we ever truly thinking for ourselves, or are we just the medium through which society thinks? Something to chew on the next time you feel a strong opinion bubbling up inside you. Is that you, or is that the social fact talking? Thanks for diving deep with us.